My family kicked me out because my sister falsely accused me of stealing. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I'm in my early 20s, the kind of person who's always worked hard, kept my head down, and done what I could for the people I loved. I wasn't perfect, but I was loyal. At home, loyalty didn't seem to mean much. My dad, Robert, ran the house with his rules, his temper, and his word always being final. My mom, Linda, was softer, but she never spoke up when it counted. And then there was Hannah, my younger sister. She was the favorite. Pretty, spoiled, used to getting her way. It all started with a necklace. My mom's favorite piece of jewelry went missing from her dresser. She wore it on holidays and kept it locked away most of the time. When it disappeared, everyone was upset, but I never thought for a second that the blame would land on me. That was until Hannah stood in the kitchen one night, eyes wide with fake tears, and said she saw me sneaking into Mom's room. I laughed at first. I thought it was a bad joke, but my dad's face went cold. My mom gasped like she'd been stabbed in the chest. I tried to defend myself, swearing I'd never touch Mom's things, but Hannah played her part too well. She shook her head, pretended to be hurt, and whispered that she just wanted to do the right thing. The verdict was decided before I even opened my mouth again. Robert slammed his hand against the table and said he wouldn't tolerate a thief under his roof. My mom cried but didn't stop him. I begged them to listen, to trust me, but they turned away like I was a stranger. My dad told me to pack a bag and get out. I thought he was bluffing, but minutes later, I was standing outside our house with a small backpack stuffed with clothes, my wallet, and the $20 I had left from my last paycheck. My mom pressed the bills into my hand like that would fix anything. She didn't even meet my eyes. Hannah stood in the doorway behind them, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. The night air was sharp and heavy. I stood there waiting, hoping someone would call me back in, tell me they believed me. No one did. My dad shut the door, and I heard the lock click. That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of their family anymore. I was on my own, and as much as it broke me, a small spark of anger burned in my chest. If they were so quick to throw me away, maybe they didn't deserve me at all. The streetlights blurred as I sat in my car, parked behind an old gas station. The seatbelt dug into my side because I hadn't bothered to adjust it before curling up. I used my jacket as a pillow, but the cold still found its way into my bones. I didn't have a destination, only the thought that anywhere was better than knocking on the door of the house that had shut me out. Days turned into a blur. I lived off vending machine snacks and gas station coffee, trying to stretch the few bills I had left. Every morning I woke with a stiff neck and went straight to the public library. There I filled out application after application, clicking submit until my fingers cramped. I circled entry level, any shift, willing to relocate. The words all started to feel hollow, but I couldn't stop. If I let myself rest, I'd start thinking, and thinking hurt more than hunger. At night, when the parking lot was quiet, I scrolled through job postings on my phone until the battery died. Sometimes I just stared at the dark screen, listening to the sound of trucks on the highway. The loneliness wrapped around me tighter than the blanket I didn't have. Meanwhile, I knew exactly what was happening back at the house. I could imagine Hannah laughing in the living room, leaning against the arm of the couch like she owned the place. She probably tossed her hair over her shoulder while Dad praised her for being responsible. Mom would nod along, relieved that at least one daughter turned out the way they wanted. The picture burned in my mind and twisted in my chest like a knife. I wanted to believe the people who raised me would reach out, even once. Maybe a phone call, maybe just a message asking if I was safe. But my phone stayed silent. Not a single word from Dad. Not a single check-in from Mom. Nothing but the steady silence of people who had decided I didn't matter anymore. The hardest part wasn't hunger or exhaustion. It was knowing that my own family had chosen to believe a lie instead of me. They had turned their backs without hesitation, without even listening. That knowledge pressed down harder than the roof of the car pressing against my knees. Some nights I broke. Tears soaked into the seat fabric as I begged the universe to give me one person who cared. Other nights, though, something else started to rise inside me. It was small at first, like a coal catching fire. Anger. Every memory of being overlooked, every word they used against me, every moment Hannah smirked while I took the blame. It all started feeding the flame. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long I could last like this. But under the hunger and the cold, there was a spark that refused to die. That spark whispered that one day, I'd make them regret ever pushing me out. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled the air the first morning I walked into the diner. The place was small, with cracked red booths and a counter lined with silver stools that squeaked when you spun them. I hadn't expected much when I pushed open the door. but the woman behind the counter looked up from the register with warm eyes and a quick smile. Her name was Maggie. She asked if I was looking for work before I even said a word. I told her I'd scrub floors, wash dishes, anything at all. She studied me for a moment, like she could see the exhaustion I was trying to hide, and then she nodded. You start tomorrow. Aprons in the back. That was it. No questions about where I lived, no lectures about experience. Just trust, simple and rare. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift in my chest. The work was rough at first. Long hours on my feet, balancing heavy trays, learning the rhythm of the grill orders and coffee refills. My hands blistered, my back ached, and I went home with the scent of grease clinging to my clothes. But I didn't complain. Every shift meant money in my pocket, and every dollar went straight into a jar I kept tucked in the glove box of my car. I promised myself I wouldn't waste a single cent. Maggie noticed how hard I pushed myself. Sometimes she slipped me a free sandwich after the lunch rush, or pressed a few extra dollars into my hand when tips ran low. She never made me feel like charity. Instead, she said things like, "You've got grit, Emily. Don't let anyone take that from you." Those words stuck. It had been so long since anyone believed I had value. In her steady voice, I started to believe it too. She gave me more shifts, trusted me with closing the register, even let me run the floor on busy nights. With every responsibility, I felt my confidence grow. I stopped seeing myself as the girl who had been thrown out. I was someone who could build, even from nothing. When I lay back in the car after a double shift, the exhaustion didn't crush me anymore. It fueled me. My jar of bills slowly thickened, each one a step away from the darkness I'd been trapped in. One night, as I wiped down the counter, I caught my reflection in the chrome napkin holder. My hair was messy, my apron stained, but my eyes looked different, steady, certain. That was the moment I made a quiet promise to myself. I would rise, not just to survive, but to create a life on my own terms. I would be sharper, wiser, and untouchable. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had Maggie's faith, my own 2 hands, and a fire burning in my chest. That was enough to begin again. The bell above the diner door jingled one slow afternoon, and I looked up from wiping the counter. A tall man with sandy hair and a crooked smile walked in, and it took me a moment to recognize Jack, my cousin. I hadn't seen him since a family barbecue years ago, back when things still felt normal. He slid onto a stool, ordered a coffee, and after a few minutes of small talk, his eyes narrowed like he'd just remembered something. "You still living at home?" he asked casually. The question hit me like a jab. I told him no, keeping my voice even, though I didn't give details. He stirred his coffee slowly, then leaned in a little. "Funny thing, couple weeks back, I saw your sister down on Maple Street. She was in that pawn shop near the laundromat, the one with the neon sign. Looked like she was dropping off jewelry. Recognized your mom's necklace clear as day." The rag froze in my hand. My pulse hammered so hard I thought he might hear it. He didn't notice the way my throat tightened. He just went on sipping like he'd mentioned the weather. But inside me, something sharp and electric snapped to life. That necklace. The very thing that tore my world apart. The very reason I was sleeping in my car, clawing my way back piece by piece. And here was confirmation, falling into my lap from a relative who had no idea what it meant. I nodded, forced a smile, and thanked him for stopping by, but my mind was already racing. I had proof within reach now. Real proof. All I had to do was walk into that pawn shop and ask the right question. I could clear my name in an instant, but the thought wasn't as simple as it should have been. If I showed them the truth, what then? Would my father suddenly open the door again, pretending nothing happened? Would my mother clutch me in relief, like the betrayal never happened? The idea churned in my stomach, sour and bitter. Part of me craved it. I wanted them to know they were wrong, that they threw me out for nothing. I wanted to shove the evidence in their faces and watch the shame spread. But another part of me asked why I should even bother. They didn't hesitate to cast me aside. They didn't question, didn't hesitate, didn't defend me. Did people like that deserve forgiveness? The longer I thought about it, the less I wanted reconciliation, and the more I wanted something else. Justice wasn't enough anymore. I wanted consequence. I wanted every smirk, every accusation, every slammed door to come back and crush them. By the time I hung up my apron that night, my decision was made. I wouldn't just prove myself. I would make them pay for believing a lie over me. I started going through every secondhand store and cash for goods place in town, moving from block to block with a quiet, steady purpose. I kept my head down, watching faces more than aisles, learning how each place recorded transactions and how owners handled new items. Some doors were locked before I could get inside. Others welcomed me with bored clerks who glanced at my clothes and kept scrolling their phone. I learned to look casual, to ask small questions that felt ordinary. "Do you take costume jewelry? How long do you hold things before they're sold?" Little things, but they added up. On the 4th day, a cramped shop near the corner with a hand-painted sign slowed me. The windows were crowded with bracelets and watches, and the bell above the door complained when I pushed it open. The man behind the counter moved with the practiced indifference of someone who had seen every story people brought in. I showed him a photo of the missing item, an old, distinctive pendant my mother had worn, and he didn't blink. He asked for my name and why I was asking. I told him I was trying to help someone find something lost. He hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small cardboard box. There it was, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. The pendant looked dull from being handled, but the flaw on its back was unmistakable. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought the man must hear it. He pushed a stack of paper across the counter, a tiny slip with ink that matched the date a few weeks earlier, and a longer receipt with a number that matched the shop's ledger. He said it had come in from a woman who'd asked for quick cash. He couldn't remember her name at first, but I kept him talking until he described the hair, the jacket, details that matched the memory I had of my sister. I took photos of every scrap he would let me photograph. I copied the handwriting on the pawn ticket into my notebook and memorized the counterman's description like a prayer. When he agreed to give me a signed statement, short, official-sounding, and careful, I felt I had the first real things I could hold up to the people who had denied me. It wasn't just evidence. It was a small, solid truth I had manufactured with my own hand. But I also knew that handing the papers to my family would not be the catharsis people imagine. Proof by itself would sting, but it might not make them see the deeper wrong, how fast they had discarded me. That thought became the real plan. I started to imagine moments, quiet and inconvenient, that would force them to look inward. I would not storm into the house waving documents like a victory flag. Instead, I wanted the revelation to arrive where it could not be ignored, during a time when their routines were interrupted and their certainty cracked. So I kept collecting. I went back to the pawn shop twice more to confirm dates and signatures, to ask the owner for any video footage he might have, and to speak to the two regulars who had been there when the piece came in. One remembered a blue scarf. Another remembered the sound of a child laughing in the alley outside. I gathered statements, receipts, small photographs, each one a quiet brick in the wall I was building. Every night after work, I laid the items out on the diner table, grouping and labeling them until the evidence read like a clear sentence. The rage that had begun as a hot spark was steady now, sharpened by proof and patience. I was careful, precise, and strangely calm. They had thrown me away in a heartbeat. I would make the truth arrive in a way they could not shrug off. I watched them struggle from a distance and did nothing. When an overdue notice slipped under my mother's door and a collection agent called twice, I heard about it through a neighbor, not from. A year earlier, I might have handed over what I had, smoothed things over with a check and a smile. This time I sat on my hands. I had a steady paycheck now and some savings tucked away, but the choice to withhold help felt like the only honest response to how quickly they'd abandoned me. The first time my father rang, voice tight and full of excuses, I listened but kept my answer short. He hinted at a loan, then asked if I could cover a bill until next week. I could have. Instead, I said no. I told him I was saving for something important and that I couldn't help right then. He tried guilt, then anger. I returned silence and a calm refusal. When my mother called afterward, her questions sounded small and frantic. I let the line go to voicemail. People who once expected me to drop everything began to notice the new boundary. A cousin who used to ask favors for me started hesitating before calling. Invitations that used to come easily slowed to a trickle. I did not announce my decision to anyone. I merely stopped being the safety net they assumed I would always be. Watching them tighten their belts and count pennies felt like a slow, private justice. At the same time, I worked on the quieter part of my plan. I did not stage loud confrontations or send dramatic messages. Instead, I let facts weave themselves into conversations, casual and careful. At family meals, I asked innocent questions that made people remember details. When had Hannah been seen leaving town with a bag? Who had noticed her at odd hours? Whether anyone had ever seen her with expensive things she couldn't explain. I phrased things like curiosity, never accusation. With neighbors and distant relatives, I used the same soft tactic. I mentioned things I had observed in passing. How a certain piece of jewelry looked out of place on Hannah, how someone had come by late to buy something urgently. Nobody liked the idea that one of their own might lie, so they leaned in. Whisper by whisper, the pattern formed. People began to fit pieces together that they had previously ignored. Word spread in the way small towns do, in doorways, at school meetings, over backyard fences. Invitations to church luncheons stopped arriving for Hannah. A distant aunt stopped sharing holiday plans with my parents, citing family concerns. Shops that once welcomed her politely suggested she return later. The warmth that had surrounded her like armor thinned. I felt a curious mix of triumph and sorrow. Seeing her cornered by watchful eyes gave me a brittle satisfaction, but also emptied something inside me. The ache that had once kept me awake at night, the stunned betrayal, softened into a hard, clean purpose. I never sought to ruin lives beyond repair. I only wanted the world they had always offered her to adjust, even a little, to the truth of who she was. When Hannah's smile started to slip in public, when people checked their purses before sitting next to her, I understood that consequences had a shape. They arrived slowly, not as spectacle but as a steady, persistent unwinding. I kept my distance and watched it happen, letting the quiet justice unfold exactly as I had planned. I chose a night when I knew she'd be alone. The house lights glowed faintly through the blinds, and I waited until the chatter of the television in the living room faded before knocking once on the back door. She opened it, startled, her hair pulled back and a drink in her hand. For a moment she looked smug, like she expected me to plead. Then she saw my eyes and the folder I carried, and her expression cracked. I stepped inside without asking. The air smelled of perfume and microwave popcorn. I set the folder on the counter, sliding it open just enough for the papers to show, the receipts, the signature, the copies I had gathered. She glanced down, and her face drained of color. Her voice broke first. "Emily, wait, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, steady and cold. My words didn't rise, they landed. "You took what wasn't yours, and you pointed the finger at me. You didn't just lie. You destroyed everything I had." She reached for the folder, but I snapped it shut before her fingers touched it. Panic crept into her tone. "Please don't tell them. I'll fix it, I swear. I'll get it back, I'll explain. Just don't ruin me." Her begging might have once tugged at me, but not anymore. I watched her tremble, the mask she always wore slipping inch by inch. The control she'd lorded over me for so long was gone. "You don't get to decide anymore," I told her. My voice was quiet, sharper than a shout. "You stole from Mom and ruined my life. You'll watch me take everything back." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. She blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself, but her hands betrayed her, twisting together until her knuckles turned white. She had no quick excuse left, no dramatic performance to sway anyone. I leaned closer, so close she couldn't avoid my eyes. "You'll feel every ounce of what you did. Not today, not tomorrow, but when it counts." Her lips parted like she wanted to protest, but nothing came. For the first time, she looked smaller than me, fragile. The girl who once smirked behind my parents' shoulders now stood in her own kitchen, powerless. I gathered the folder and turned for the door. She whispered something faint, maybe another plea, but I didn't answer. The click of the door closing behind me said enough. Walking away, I felt no pity. What she feared wasn't exposure, it was me. For the first time, she knew exactly where the balance had shifted and that the ground under her was crumbling. Maggie was the one who nudged me toward it. She said sometimes truth had to be served at the same table as the people who had turned their backs. So I called, careful with my tone, suggesting we meet for a meal together. My voice carried a softness I didn't feel, and to my surprise they agreed quickly, almost relieved. We met at a quiet restaurant with dim lighting and booths tucked close. My father arrived stiff, my mother nervous, and Hannah followed in a cloud of perfume, her smile forced but present. They thought this was an olive branch. I let them believe it. Conversations started awkward. My mother asked about work. My father kept his eyes on the menu, and Hannah filled the silence with stories about errands and friends. I nodded, gave short answers, waited for the moment to come. The air felt thick, like everyone was balancing on glass. After the food was served and plates half finished, I reached into my bag and placed a stack of papers on the table. No announcement, no warning. Just the folder opening to reveal slips with dates, signatures, and the statement written in the shop owner's neat hand. I pushed them toward the center where every eye could see. My father frowned, confused, then leaned closer. His jaw tightened as he read. My mother's hand rose to her mouth, trembling as she traced the familiar description of the pendant. Hannah froze, her fork still hovering. "I didn't steal anything," I said calmly, the first full sentence of the night. "She did. I didn't point. I didn't need to." Their eyes had already shifted. My father flipped through the receipts twice, his face darkening with every page. My mother whispered my name like a prayer, as if saying it would undo the months of silence. Hannah finally spoke, her voice high and brittle. "It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like," I cut in. The weight of the evidence crushed her carefully built facade. Her words tangled, then collapsed into a flood of excuses and half-sob. She grabbed for the papers, desperate, but my father slammed his palm down to keep them in place. The sharp sound silenced the room. "You lied," my mother whispered, looking at her youngest with eyes full of disbelief. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't look at me. She couldn't. For once, Hannah had no performance left. Her breakdown filled the space where her arrogance used to sit. My father sat back heavily, the rigid authority he always carried suddenly hollow. My mother's sobs turned quiet and uneven. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I let the silence do the work. The betrayal I had endured was now undeniable, spread out on the table between us like a second meal none of them could stomach. They were stunned, broken by the truth they had refused to see. And Hannah, cornered by her own lies, could do nothing but crumble. The room sat heavy after Hannah's collapse. No one touched their food anymore. The papers lay scattered like shards, impossible to sweep away. My father tried to gather himself, clearing his throat, reaching for the voice of authority he had always wielded. "Emily," he began, softer than I had ever heard, "we made a mistake. We should have trusted you." My mother's hand stretched across the table, trembling, as though she could bridge the chasm with a touch. "Please," she whispered, eyes glossy, "come home. We can start over. We'll make this right." For a long moment I said nothing. I let their words hang there, fragile and desperate. Hannah hiccuped beside them, wiping her face, but even she murmured something that sounded like sorry. I leaned back, folding my arms. My voice when it came was steady, not cruel but immovable. "You didn't hesitate. One accusation, and I was nothing to you. You didn't ask, didn't look at me, didn't even give me a chance. You believed the worst without blinking." My father lowered his gaze. My mother's lips trembled. The truth of it rang louder than any shout. "I survived without you," I continued, my tone firm. "And I will keep surviving. But don't think for a second I'll forget how fast you turned your backs. That door you closed on me? It won't open again." My mother let out a choked sob. My father looked older, smaller, his authority stripped away. Hannah shifted in her seat, her shame thick in the silence, but I didn't spare her another glance. I stood, gathering the folder, tucking it neatly under my arm. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound final. "Live with what you did," I said simply. No one tried to stop me. No hand grabbed mine. No plea followed me as I walked out. The hush that fell behind me was louder than any apology could have been. I felt it pressing against my back as I pushed through the door, the cool night air washing over me. For the first time since I had been cast out, I held myself tall, shoulders squared, steps even. The weight I carried wasn't shame anymore. It was strength, carved from everything they had forced me through. I didn't look back. They would sit there, surrounded by proof, by silence, by the ruins of their choices. They would remember the night their daughter refused to bend, and that memory would echo long after I was gone. I walked away not as someone discarded, but as someone who had chosen herself. The pride in that truth steadied me with every step. They had lost me, and that loss would haunt them far longer than it ever haunted me. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm I hadn't known before. At the diner, Maggie began trusting me with more than just tables. She handed me the keys some mornings, letting me open the place myself. She showed me the books, let me handle the register, and when the health inspector came by, she stood back and let me answer the question. One afternoon, she called me into the office, smiled in that quiet way of hers, and said, "You've earned more than an apron. I'm promoting you." The raise wasn't huge, but it was steady, and with it, I started putting aside enough to think about a real apartment instead of just gas station parking lots. Slowly, I built something that belonged only to me. Jack stopped by often, bringing groceries or just sitting at the counter after his shifts. He didn't press for details, didn't pity me, just offered company in his easy, comfortable way. Maggie, in her no-nonsense style, kept reminding me that grit mattered more than approval. Along the way, a few coworkers drifted into my circle too. People who saw me for who I was, not who my parents had painted me to be. They became a kind of chosen family, stitched together by kindness, trust, and shared late-night laughter over pie and coffee. On the other side of town, things shifted for Hannah. Whispers had teeth now. Neighbors stopped leaning in when she spoke. Instead, they leaned away. Invitations dried up. I heard through cousins that people hesitated to leave their purses near her, that shopkeepers kept a close eye when she stepped inside. She had once basked in the easy glow of being favored, but that glow had dimmed into suspicion. The very attention she used to crave became a spotlight that burned. I didn't need to watch her fall directly. The knowledge of it was enough. Each update reached me like a quiet signal that justice didn't always need noise, it just needed time. She had spun lies with ease, but lies have a way of lingering, staining every smile, every introduction. And now, she wore those stains everywhere she went. My own path stretched wider each day. I signed papers for my first apartment, a tiny place with peeling paint but sunlight that streamed through the windows in the morning. I filled it with secondhand furniture, each piece carried in by friends who laughed and teased and called it home before I even did. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Sitting on the floor one evening, surrounded by boxes and the smell of fresh coffee, I let myself breathe fully. I didn't think about forgiveness. That word had no place here. What I carried instead was sharper, the understanding that betrayal had carved me into someone unbreakable. I wasn't waiting for them to make amends. I wasn't waiting for approval. I had become someone stronger, sharper, untouchable. And that, more than anything, was the ending I deserved. Do you think I made the right choice walking away, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like mine.